Hey guys, welcome back. This is Blue Forest. So today we're doing the final installment, part 6 of the SIG 100 list, where we're looking at each SIG in the game by class, both at low SIG level, but again, giving you a clear picture of what each bot looks like maxed out at SIG 100, so that you can make more informed decisions about where to feed those signature programs and which bots to dupe and buy from the store. And even though we are not ranking these SIGs, we are looking at things like activation rate because some SIGs will end up being more beneficial and useful to you. So today we're going to wrap up with the demo class and we're going to start with Megatronus. So Tronus, his SIG is the Relic of Obedience. This has a chance to trigger every time he gains a bar of power, and when it does, he prevents the opponent from activating any buffs or debuffs for 7 seconds. At SIG 1, it's about a 13% chance to activate. That goes up to 65% at SIG 100. Now, you might look at that at low SIG level, think, okay, 13 to 20% at low level. That doesn't sound like much. But remember, he has a chance to activate it every single time he gains a bar of power. And so that means that it does not need to be at a very high SIG level in order for it to activate relatively consistently, right? So if you're using Tronus, and most people eventually do, you'd want to invest some into it to get that chance up somewhat, but it does not need to be maxed out at all in order for it to benefit you, because it is an excellent SIG. I mean, it applies to all buffs and debuffs. That means that when it activates, opponents will not be able to land things like DOT on you. They won't activate, special buffs, range buffs, armor buffs. I mean, all kinds of buffs and debuffs they will not be able to apply. That can be helpful both offensively and defensively. I will say, though, that remember, this is Megatronus. And I have said before that you do not want to over-rely on this guy. He makes everything in the game easier. And so, if you want everything in the game to be easy, by all means, spend a long time investing in his SIG. Just remember, he is a Titan bot, so it would take an incredibly long time to max him out. But I've always been of the opinion that it is best to use Tronus for the most difficult content only, because if you want to be the best player possible, you do not want to over-rely on him. So getting him up to, say, mid-SIG level will be perfectly fine. You'll get plenty of use out of it. He's already a very OP bot, and so having an awakened, low to mid-level SIG Tronus is going to be just fine for you, and you'll find that it is extremely beneficial without it being a maxed out SIG. So that brings us to Ironhide. So Demohide, his SIG is Obliteration. This is a SIG that gives him a very large crit damage boost with his specials. The downside to this SIG is that it is only a one-time SIG. It activates once per fight, that's it. But the way it works is with his specials, he has a 50% chance to activate it. When he does, he sees a 204% additional crit damage boost at SIG 1. This goes up to 600% additional crit damage at SIG 100. So it roughly triples. Now, the good thing about it is that it is a lot more damage. And even at low to mid SIG level, you're going to get a major boost in that damage. Unfortunately, though, like I said, it's not only a one-time SIG, but you also cannot control which special it will activate on. So generally, when you use him, if you want to take advantage of the SIG, you'll probably want to go up to a special 2 or 3 first, right? Because those are his really big damage specials. So it is really fun, you land these huge hits. Some of the biggest damage in the game ever recorded has been with a high SIG Ironhide, doing a special 3. There's no doubt that it's useful in the sense that it's extremely offensive. Just remember, though, it's a one-time deal, and you cannot choose which special it will activate on, which means that in longer fights in particular, right, the SIG activates, you get this huge damage boost, but then it's over. So the question of whether to invest in it or not, it really comes down to your preferences. Some people really love this SIG, other people just don't find it very useful, even though it's fun because it's only a one-time deal. The good news is that in shorter fights, if you're using Ironhide, use a special 2 or 3, a lot of the time it will instantly kill the opponent because it's just a ton of damage. The other nice thing is that even at low level, you're getting 200 to 300% extra crit damage. That's a lot. So it does not need to be maxed out in order to see a really strong benefit. I would just caution you about investing too much into it unless you're all in with him. I mean, if you're a heavy Ironhide user, you use Autobot teams, you love him, of course, invest in it, and you're going to see phenomenal damage when the SIG activates. It's just remember, though, that it is a one-time deal, and a lot of SIGs in the game will activate a lot more often. So it's just something to be mindful of. So that brings us to Megatron. So this is Revenge of the Fallen Megatron, or Demotron. His SIG is All Hail Megatron. This is a healing SIG. It is also a one-time deal. It is a classic safety net SIG. So when Megatron drops below 10% health, he will recover a portion of his health. At SIG 5, it's 15.8% health. That goes up to 30% at SIG 100, so it roughly doubles. Now, this is also a polarizing SIG, kind of like Ironhides, in the sense that it's only a one-time deal. And with Megatron, there's going to be a lot of fights it doesn't activate at all, because you have to nearly die in order for it to activate. The good news is that it is a meaningful amount of healing, right? So even at low to mid SIG level, you know, if you have, let's say, a Megatron that's going to heal 20%, that's a very nice chunk of health. I mean, this is one of the things that can make him very annoying to fight against, because you effectively have to kill him twice. And if you're able to trigger it just when he drops below 10%. So if your Megatron drops to 9%, and then with his SIG, he's going to recover 20%, he will go from 9 to 29%. That is a lot. The only downside to this, though, is that he has to drop below 10% health without dying, right? So if you're at, let's say, 20% health and you end up eating a special or a really big hit that kills you, well, obviously the SIG's not going to activate, right? So he has to drop below 10%, but stay at least 1%. So it would be a little more useful if it activated at 20% instead of 10%, so that he had a little bit more room for error. With that said, though, you drop below 10% health, it triggers. It does take 3 seconds, so you want to make sure you're clear of the enemy, so you have a few seconds to recover that health, but you do get it back. And if you're using him in something like AMs or a time slide, or you might be using him in multiple fights, if you do get in trouble, right, the SIG activates. Well, when you start the next fight, you know, you will have that recovered health. So it is a safety net. Again, some people are really going to like this, other people will not. I would say if you are using Demotron a lot, invest some into it, you know, get that healing up a bit, but you certainly don't need to max it out, because the healing is pretty meaningful even at mid-level. So it's a good SIG in the sense that it's for healing, but it is a one-time SIG. You have to stay alive when he drops below 10% health, and there are going to be plenty of fights where it does not activate at all. So that brings us to Ramjet. His SIG is Momentum. So this is a SIG that gives him special damage buffs with his heavies, okay? So with Ramjet, every time he uses a heavy, he has a 50% chance to activate a special damage buff. So at SIG 5, it's 5% special damage. It goes up to 10% special damage at SIG 100. So it basically doubles. Now you might look at that and think, okay, 5%, 6% special damage doesn't sound like much. However, these can be stacked, and you can stack them up to 10. Now, if you're using Sequencer, sometimes you are able to get 11 of them, but officially the cap is 10. And so that means that in mid-length, longer fights in particular, you can get a lot of use out of this, because even a low SIG Ramjet, right? You stack up 10 of those, that's, 50, 60% extra special damage. That's significant. On top of that, I also want to mention that it does have a defensive capability as well. Stuns expire 10% faster for each special damage buff on Ramjet, which means that if you're going up against a stun bot, stuns will expire faster. And if you do have 10 special damage buffs, he will effectively be immune to stun, because he'll have 100% faster stun duration, meaning that the stuns won't activate at all. So it does have that additional defensive ability as well. The nice thing about this is that, like I said, you can stack them up. His heavies are very useful, right? Because he has those unstoppable heavies. He shrugs off damage, right? So again, in longer fights in particular, you're going to be able to get up to 10 of these buffs pretty easily. And because it doesn't scale very well, you don't have to worry so much about getting it up to high SIG. Maybe invest in it a little bit, but remember, this is an accumulative SIG, right? So it's not about getting the SIG really high. It's more about stacking those special damage buffs, right? And also remember that Ramjet, he has really great stuns with those special 2s and 3s. So, in a longer fight, you stack up those special damage buffs, you land a special 2 or 3, you get that stun, then you have an opening, you land another attack, and then sometimes you can land another special, right? So that can really, really add up that damage. So in short fights, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of use out of this, but that's fine because shorter fights are usually pretty easy anyway. It's an excellent SIG for mid-length to longer fights where you're able to stack up these buffs, and you also have that extra defensive protection, and that stuns on him will expire faster. So it's a really good SIG at low level, mid level. Does not need to be maxed out. Has a really good activation rate because you're going to be able to land them with his heavies pretty consistently. And like I said, it will be particularly useful in longer fights where you simply have more time to stack up those special damage buffs. So that brings us to Mixmaster. His SIG is Concussive Block. This has two components related to blocking and parrying. So first of all, when he blocks, he will take less block damage. So he basically gets increased block proficiency. At SIG 5, he takes 14% less damage when blocking. That goes up to 40% reduced block damage at SIG 100. In addition, his parries, so his well-timed blocks, do that thing where they knock the opponent back, right? We've all been concussive blocked by Mixmaster, and they deal damage for 40% attack. So if you like to parry, if you like to use bots like TC, Jetfire, Dinobot, certainly the Shieldmaster synergy, which is excellent, if you like this kind of bot playstyle, you could get a lot of use out of Mixmaster's signature, okay? Now, the parrying damage, so that 40% attack damage that will happen when you land those well-timed blocks, does not increase with rank. The good news about that is that if you simply have him awakened, he's going to get that increased block proficiency, and you're going to be dealing damage with those well-timed blocks. That means that you really don't need to invest too much into his SIG in order for it to be very beneficial, because it's only the increased block proficiency that's going to go up with SIG level. And because of the fact that it's related to blocking and parrying, it's going to activate pretty often, and in some fights, very often. It certainly will have a moderate to a high activation rate, depending on how much you're blocking and parrying. So you will get plenty of use out of it at low SIG level. And with that parrying, even though the attack is not significant, right? So when you concussive block an opponent, it's not going to deal a lot of damage. Again, this is one that's accumulative, which means that if you're able to land those well-timed blocks over and over again, the damage will then add up. And so it's a useful SIG, very good SIG at low level, plenty of usefulness, really good activation rate, and it has both a defensive and an offensive component to it. So next up we have Wasp. So Waspinator Lives is the name of his SIG. This is also a healing SIG and a one-time SIG. Kind of similar to Demotron's, except it does work a bit differently. So with Wasp, when he is killed, so when he gets to the point where he would be killed, he revives, purifies any debuffs on him, and generates a bit of health. So he will generate 1.3% health at SIG 1, that goes up to just over 20% health at SIG 100. Now, again, you can look at this and think, okay, a low SIG Wasp is only going to generate, between 1 and 5% health. That's true. But the difference between this SIG and, say, Demotron's is that Wasp does not have to rely on falling below 10% health but staying alive. Because with Wasp SIG, it doesn't activate until you would be killed, right? Which means that if you get into trouble, right, every time you would be killed, the SIG will activate. It is true that you will definitely want to invest some into the SIG to generate a little bit more health, right? You don't need to max it out, and of course that would take a very long time, but if you were able to get it up to mid-level, maybe you're generating 10% health, combined with the purification, and combined with the fact that he is invulnerable for a few seconds, right? So every time you fight against him, he is invulnerable. You cannot hit him until that Waspinator lives icon goes away. You invest some into this SIG, you're going to get real use out of it if it's what you're looking for. I mean, there are people that use Wasp in high-level AMs because it is kind of a cheese, right? You know, it is certainly very useful in tough fights where you might be killed. It can certainly save on revives. But it is another polarizing SIG. You know, some people are going to like it a lot. Other people find it very frustrating. But remember, though, it will also, though, work in tandem with the buffs that he's getting when he drops to below 50 and then 25% health. You know, Wasp is a much stronger bot at lower health anyway. So if you do get killed, you revive, you have, you know, a little bit of an opening in order to finish the opponent off. So it's low activation rate. Obviously, there'll be plenty of fights where it does not activate at all because you have to effectively be killed. But it does give you some protection, and like Demotron SIG, it is effectively a safety net. So next up we have Galvatron. So his SIG is the Will of Unicron. This has two components. So every time he charges up that dark energy, which he does of course by blocking, when he gets up to 30 charges, he has a chance to activate his SIG. When he does, he goes unstoppable for 6 seconds and he gains some power passively. So at SIG 1, he will generate 9.3% power over that time period. It goes up to 35.3% power at SIG 100. So this is an RNG-based SIG because he has a 0.6% chance per 1% of lost health of the opponent to activate it, which means that the lower the health of the opponent, the more likely this is to activate. The good news about it is that you'll have plenty of chances to activate it because you're obviously charging up that dark energy over and over again, right? You want to get up to 30 charges to land those heavies, and particularly that special 2 and 3 to get those really big bursts of damage that Galvatron can do. So you have plenty of chances to activate it. It's just that when the opponent is at high health, it very rarely will, right? So because it's only a 0.6% chance per 1% of lost health, if the opponent has 80% health, you'll have a 12% chance to activate it. If they're at 20% health, they'll have a nearly 50% chance to activate it. So it's a much higher chance when they're at low health. So in some sense, that's good because it's more reliable when they're at low health. And if it does activate, well, then that just helps you to finish off the fight. Remember, though, that because it is RNG-based, there will be some fights where it activates several times. There'll be other fights it doesn't activate at all. It will be more useful in longer fights, right? Because in long fights, you're going to be charging up that energy over and over again. And obviously, you know, the opponent, as they're losing health, it's just a longer fight. So that's a lot more chances. You know, you're going to get more use out of it in longer fights for sure. There'll be plenty of short fights. It does not activate at all. As it pertains to the unstoppable and the power, if you love to use Galvatron, you would want to invest in it somewhat because at low SIG, if he's only generating, 10% power, 15% power, it's not that much. If you got him up to mid SIG level, if you get him up to 20, 30% power, that's significant, which combined with any attacking you're doing will often push you up to, that next power bar, help you get up to a special 2 or 3 more quickly. And unstoppable is always useful. So there will be times that this SIG really helps you a lot, but there'll be other times it doesn't help you at all, simply because it's entirely down to RNG. So I would recommend probably getting them up to mid-level if you use Galvatron a lot. You don't have to worry about maxing it out. I mean, if you do max it out, you're going to be getting more than a full power bar, but I mean, maxing out a SIG that's entirely reliant on RNG and is entirely reliant upon the opponent losing a lot of health in order to activate it even with some consistency, that's a bit of a trade-off. So it's a decent SIG. There will be fights where it helps you out a lot, but for most people, you're going to do just fine at low to mid SIG level. Finally, that brings us to Cliffjumper. His SIG is first to fight. This is actually a very good SIG in the sense that it doesn't only have a high activation rate, it has a guaranteed activation rate because you will get one of 2 buffs at the start of the fight, depending on what happens. So if Cliffjumper lands the first hit of the fight, he will get an increased crit chance. So his crit rate will go up for the rest of the fight. If he does not land the first hit, he will get a range speed buff for half the amount instead. So at SIG 1, he has a 15% increased crit chance or a 7.5% range speed bonus. That goes up to 30% increased crit chance or 15% range bonus at SIG 100. So the good thing about this is that you're always going to get one of those two buffs. And, by the way, if the buff is nullified, if you're going up against, a tactician who nullifies or something, it will still come back after 10 seconds. So it's a guaranteed SIG, and it's permanent. And even if it's nullified, it comes back. That's really good. Also, if you're a good player, you're probably going to be able to land the first hit most of the time, because most of the time, you're probably going to want to see that increased crit rate. There will be occasional fights where you might find more benefit in actually just getting the range bonus. But generally speaking, if you want to get that increased crit rate, which you usually will, you're going to be able to, as long as you're a good enough player, to simply land the first hit. So this is the kind of SIG that's very worth investing in. I mean, if you are a major Cliffjumper user, if you love him, if you're all in on him, I would absolutely invest in it because it's guaranteed. If you're a good enough player to get that first hit in, you're going to be able to get that increased crit chance almost every time. Even if you make a mistake, you're going to get that range speed bonus. Increased crits are always great. That's always very useful, will be super helpful to Cliffjumper. So I would recommend getting him up to mid-SIG level if you're going to be using him a lot, just because you're going to be able to get tons and tons of use out of this SIG. It's very worthwhile overall. So that wraps up the demo class and wraps up the SIG 100 list series. I do hope that this video series has been useful to you and helpful. As always, take care of yourselves, and if you have any questions, let me know. Until we speak again, be well, and we will be in touch soon.